I've been asked about this. It's been comments. How did I end up in the WWE? How do you even get there? Was I called up? Was I plucked from somewhere? And that happens too. So here's how it started for me, because we're talking about this today because it's basically the 5-year anniversary of me getting hired. I started there in September of 2019. So it happened around this time, getting close to it. But the process is something I think people don't know about, may want to know. So here's my process. I had always been a fan. I think you can hear that in my voice and see what's behind me and all that. I mean, I go back as a fan to being 5 years old. So it was always like, I wonder how that can be, how I can get there. And funny enough, because I just saw somebody mention it, I did want to write for WWE. And then I listened to enough podcasts and stuff with former writers and heard the whole process. And I was like, that doesn't sound so fun. Not how it currently is or was laid out. It sounds a lot different and better now because Vince isn't running the show. And you don't have to wait 6 hours for him to answer a call or whatever. But I thought that would, maybe be a cool in, and I pushed it aside. So my career went into more football, and I did fantasy football and all that stuff. And I was always a wrestling fan, and, Busted Open popped up. And when I was doing radio on Sirius before my now second run with the company, I was doing fantasy football stuff. But I knew wrestlers that liked fantasy football, and I would always try to work stuff in. I'd put wrestling theme music, and my producer was a wrestling fan, so we would segment things that were kind of wrestling related. I would make references, but that's it. That's as far as it went. And my kind of intro to more of the wrestling business side of things was a couple of wrestlers listened to my Sirius show, and then I ended up going to TNA shows. And I'll talk more about that another time, but I met Jeff Jarrett, and yeah, if you wonder why I've talked about Jeff a lot, I go back with Jeff to 2017. No, it's got to be even more than that. It's at least 7 years. It's probably 7 to 10 years with Jeff. I've probably known Jeff for a decade. And I became friends with a lot of people in TNA and blah, 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 blah. And I would go to their shows. Never worked for them, nothing like that. But I was very in with TNA people. Trying to think, maybe it is like 10, 12 years ago now. Pretty good time for the company. Storm and Bobby Roode and Aries, Jeff Hardy. They were doing. Abyss was feuding with Bubba. A lot of good stuff was happening. A lot of top tier names. Samoa Joe, EY. It was good. It was a good show. So I was just going to those shows. So I had made friends, and I started a fantasy football league with a bunch of TNA wrestlers. Brian Kendrick was in it, and Frankie Kazarian was in it, and Brian Hebner was in it, and a few others. Ken Anderson, the former Mr. Kennedy, I talked into being in the league. We had a good solid league because they already had a league already. Like Jarrett ran like an office league. And the second year and that allowed me to have wrestlers on my show. Adam Pearce played in our league. Multiple years, the Weekend Warriors League. So that allowed me to have an excuse to have wrestlers on my show. And Dreamer this is probably the year or two after we started those leagues. Dreamer had done some stuff with TNA. And Jeff brought me out to his house once to be like his fantasy football consigliere. He flew me out, and that's a whole weird, funny story. But Dreamer was supposed to be there, and he couldn't. He had some kind of family emergency or something like that. So I didn't get to meet Tommy. And I had grown up watching Tommy, and I owned the Innovator Violence Red t-shirt and all that stuff. And he was doing media to promote House of Hardcore, which is his promotion I would end up working at. And I tried to get him on. He was doing media, and I had an off-season football show, and I was like, we could do whatever we wanted. And he DM'd me after it was over. He's like, oh, sorry, I missed you. Would love to come on another time. So I had him on again, and he's a huge sports fan, to the point that he kind of roots for everybody. And we talked further, and he's like, anytime you want to come to a show, let me know. And I was in the Philly area, so Tommy and I hit it off, and we ended up in fantasy leagues together. He's like, I'll be in yours if you be in mine. I was like, absolutely. And I started to go to House of Hardcore shows just to watch. And I knew enough people there. And, I think I had met AJ through TNA, and they ran a show in Philly, and he was IWGP champion. And I had met Daniels and Kazarian and, talked to them. So I knew enough people that I was not just a random fan to them. And there was the respect level, because I never tried to push hey, I like wrestling. Can we talk about it? It was always like, hey, you want to talk football with me? Sure. By the way, anytime, and I'm not saying it works for everybody, you meet a wrestler, talk about one of their shared hobbies, not wrestling. I guarantee you'll get probably a better conversation. And that's what it was to me. I was able to just kind of mingle and talk to people and be around wrestling. And talk about football, and I went to enough of those shows. I think I've mentioned this before, but because I went to those shows, Vic Joseph, NXT commentator, had done indie stuff, had worked for CBS Radio in Cleveland. Him and I hit it off, and we did fantasy leagues together, and he would come on my show on Sirius and talk about the Browns, and I would go on his show in Cleveland and talk about fantasy, and we were, we hit it off because of that. And he would eventually get hired, I think, as everybody knows, and he's still calling NXT to this day, as you'll see him tomorrow night with Booker T. So we kept in contact, and in late 2018, maybe October, he had asked if I was interested, and I was like, I was working for Bleach Report at the time. I was the lead fantasy football analyst for them. I was doing a lot of on-camera stuff, once again, working in a lot of fun, random wrestling stuff and things like that, and I was doing Sirius and hosting the Game Day show. If anybody remembered that, it was basically like Red Zone on the radio, 6 hours every Sunday, and I had a weekend show, and I was doing well in the fantasy world, making good enough money. But, Vic would keep up with me. Hey, are you interested? And there was a host role, and I didn't know what it was, really generic. And it was basically an Orlando-based host role. You would do, the live house shows, and you would host, and you'd fire up the crowd. And he's like, you got to move to Florida. I don't know what the guarantees are. I was like, nah, I'm good. And then he said, you should talk to Tom Phillips. Tom Hannafin, obviously working alongside Matt, John McKing, former Aiden English, and TNA now. Tom's fantastic. And Tom was right in the middle of his run at WWE. Doing well. And had called all the shows, and, him and Graves are still one of my favorite commentary teams ever. Man, they just clicked. So Tom happened to live somewhat close to where I did, and it connected us, and I met Tom for a beer, and we talked. And we hit it off on a lot of things in sports and football and fantasy football. And Tom's a big Penn State guy. He does his podcast still for the last few years. And passionate about that, but way more passionate about wrestling than I think people realized. You wouldn't have known he knew as much about all kinds of wrestling because you just heard him on WWE. And at that point, it was very much you got to follow rules as a commentator, and you only say these things, and you got to get out of these bad habits and all that. And Tom did all kinds of stuff. He was on the second screen. He was getting messed with by the New Day. He called every show you could call, and went up and down, and fell out of favor and back into favor. And I don't think they handled him well. I don't think he ever should have got fired. That was ridiculous. They're still looking to replace him, honestly. He was the correct heir apparent to Michael Cole. And I know they hired Joe Tessitore, and Corey's doing a good job. Tom's excellent. And I think in current day WWE, if Tom wasn't forced to follow the rules he was forced to follow, and the commentary book that was like this big of what to say and what not to say and how to say it, and you're playing to Vince and KD. Tom should have been the guy who was, and maybe he still will be. Maybe they'll wake up and go, damn, he's good. We have this partnership, but what that guy? Oh yeah, you had that guy. Anyway, Tom was very nice, very helpful to me. He said, hey, listen, I'll keep a heads up. So I see a role in, I want to say early 2019. a logger position where basically it said remote next to it. And I was in my football off season. I was like, hey, this would be cool. Like, you just got to log highlights or stuff for the network. I could do that from wherever. It said remote. So I reach out to Tom, and he gets a hold of somebody, and it's like, oh no, it was just in the remote office. You got to live up there. All right, that's out. He's like, but I'll keep looking for you. So I think we got to like May, maybe early June. I want to say May of 2019. And I was keeping an eye out, and whether I saw it or it popped up on a wrestling website somewhere, digital talent, on-air digital talent. That was the job title. And I saw it, and before I could message him, he texted me. He said, apply for this job right now. I said, okay. So I did. Now, here's the fun thing. If you ever used Workday for any of those people and you have to sign up on every different company's Workday, I did that. And I fill out the very generic stuff, name and where'd you go to school and all. And then when it went further, it was talk about your WWE fandom, if you have any. So I basically was like, what's your favorite storyline? And I had a few, but I knew the one I could write out and verbalize the best is basically Shawn Michaels winning the 1995 Rumble, losing to Diesel at WrestleMania 11, turning babyface right after that because Sid turns against him. He comes back. He's a babyface. The stuff with Jeff Jarrett, the stuff with Owen, getting knocked out, having to battle his way back from being a heel to becoming a babyface to putting him out on his own to coming back at the 96 Rumble to win it. And now he goes in and they tell the whole boyhood dream story. And you got Jose Lothario with him. And he wins and so I basically said, Shawn from Rumble 95 to WrestleMania 12 is one of my favorite stories. How you built a mid-card heel who had all the talent but wasn't quite ready. And then turning him into the next babyface of the company and Brett putting him over. I wrote that out. Okay. So I'm waiting. I check with Tom, and he hits up and he goes, okay, I know people have seen it. I've kind of tried to nudge people along. I think you'll hear something soon. So I remember getting ready to go to a Phillies game or something with friends, and I get a call from like a Connecticut area code, Stamford area code, whatever it was. And it's the HR rep who was in charge of hiring. That's all the person's job was. Hey, we'd like to talk to you, blah, blah, blah. Okay, sure. So it's a very basic, like, would you be willing to move or could you commute? And at that time, I was 2.5 hours away. I said, I'll make it work. Say everything I'm supposed to say, blah, blah, blah. Okay, we'll let you know. Very HR-y kind of stuff. This was not a wrestling person. This was not somebody I was going to work for. This was the first step in terms of an interview. So I do that first interview, and I wait, and I get told, okay, and this is right during, it's like June, July. So people are taking time off. They're on personal time off, PTO. I keep getting told, listen, we want to schedule something, but the hiring manager's busy. Okay, fine. I understand that. And I finally go, okay, we scheduled something. So I remember like saying like, I will make time. And I was playing golf about an hour from my house, and I knew I had to get home back for this interview. And I don't make it. I get hit traffic, and I have to like pull off into a like side parking, like some kind of shopping center, and it's in a terrible reception area, and I keep getting disconnected from the hiring manager. And I'm like, oh my God, I can't. And I took the interview in a Burger King parking lot and finally found a good enough reception. And I'm talking to him about it. And this is somebody who, was the number 2 person in digital. I didn't know his name. I had looked him up and was trying to find out more about him. And he's detailing everything. And he knew my wrestling fandom and had seen my stuff. And he starts telling me about what was going to become the bump. He's like, we're thinking about doing the show, and I think Kathy Kelly's going to host it, and it's going to be a weekly talk show, and it might go more than one day a week, and it might go we'll talk about Raw and SmackDown, but it might branch out. He goes, do you know all the products? I said, I know NXT, New UK. He goes, we might talk about that stuff. And he goes, honestly, we know AEW's coming up soon, and it hadn't debuted with Dynamite yet, because that debuts the same day the bump does in October of 2019, a few months later. And I said, sure, I'll talk about that too. I said, and I had done a New Japan podcast and all that stuff. And it went well. And he's like, okay, a lot of people are still off. We want to get you in there to do some screen tests, some on-screen stuff. Okay. So I just got to wait. And then I get the date. I think it was like end of June, maybe early July. And I drive to Stamford. I don't know where I'm going. I didn't even know they had multiple buildings. There's the one that I guess a lot of people would have seen for years on 95. That's on the right side off exit 9. And now the bigger building is a couple exits south across from the train station. That's the main HQ. So I knew about that one, but they're like, oh no, you're going to this one. I was like, where am I? I didn't go to Titan Towers for my interview. I went to the digital building, which is right next to the TV building, which is where you've seen a million things. The TV building is that guy right there doing WWF Mania or Live Wire or any of those Coliseum. Did you get free gift videos with all the tape machines behind him and Macho Man? And they shot the Edge and Christian show in there. And, anytime you've seen Scott Stanford for the last 15 years, he's been in there in the green screen studio. And that's when I was there, did Raw Talk and SmackDown Lowdown from there. They shot interviews in there. All kinds of stuff happened in that building. And that TV building is, where all the TV main production people had their offices. Down the road was Titan Towers. Now everybody's under one roof in that brand new HQ, which you've probably seen a lot of. So I go to this digital building, and they had only been in there for like a month at the time. Everybody had been at Titan Towers. So I get brought in, and okay, you're going to meet with a few people that work in our digital department that are producers or whatever. Okay, and that's all I knew. I knew that. But the funny thing was, a few days before the interview, I get told you're going to do an on-screen test. And this is back to the HR person who's not a wrestling person. You're going to do a WWE now. Are you familiar with that? And that's what, at the time, Kathy was doing them. Ryan Popola was like her backup. And then, Mackenzie took that over. And I said, yeah. So I got a script. And I wasn't told anything. And I asked what to wear. Wear what you think you should wear. This is what they told me. And I'm going, okay. And the idea was like, present yourself as you think you'll be presented on these shows. So I look at them enough and go, okay, it's a bomber jacket and t-shirt. And that's what I showed up in, which I would end up wearing for the next 5 years, basically. That's what it was. And the night before, I wasn't told about teleprompter. I wasn't told about. I was just told, hey, you're going to do the script on camera. They change it the morning of. Actually, you're going to do this one instead. So I leave. I get this email. I had to leave very early in the morning. I pull over at a Wawa. I record myself on a voice memo or recording saying the script. And then I just listened to it the whole ride, just so it would be stuck in my head. So when I got up there, I'd go, I can say it. And whether that was an intentional way to mess with my head or it was just, actually, we gave you the wrong one, I don't know. It was WWE. Who knows? I didn't have to sell a pencil or anything like Renee did. But this was digital. This wasn't a TV gig. And there was a difference. So I get there and I get pulled into a room and I get interviewed by 2 producers and a director. And that was the weekend. I can't remember what pay-per-view it was. Might have been Extreme Rules, something like that. But they did watch along, and that's where Corbin hit McAfee or Matt Hardy, or both of them hit McAfee, because Pat was doing watch along at the time with a kendo stick. And I never watched watch along. Never. But I watched that one. And the director who's in there ran watch along. So we're talking about, and I bring that up, and he's like, wow, you watched that? And I was like, oh, yeah, sure. I had my second screen and blah, blah. Once again, if you're getting into any stuff like this, know the product, know what you're talking about. even if it's stuff you don't like, whether it's wrestling or entertainment, know what you're walking into and be familiar, because if you speak that way, it's going to make an impact. And I guarantee, and I know for a fact, they brought in people who didn't know wrestling. And that was typical WWE hiring practice. We don't necessarily want wrestling people. We want good personalities who walked in there and didn't know. There was someone who ended up getting hired there who bombed so badly and only got hired because someone else moved on. And there was a different role for that person, but didn't know the product enough. And I heard that story and I was absolutely baffled by it. So I have this interview and talk about, my experience. Someone in that room had worked for Bleacher Report when I was there, so there was familiarity with me, but we had never worked together. A producer who had done road stuff, who has also since moved on. Two of the people that in that room don't work there anymore and haven't for years. So, I like doing interviews. I like being in that spot. I get told, okay, we're going to bring you out. And there was no real set, and we want you to do this WWE now. And don't worry about missing lines. We edit it and all that. And all of a sudden I went, oh, God. So I do it. And if you saw the bump promos, that's what that was. My screen test for WWE before I got hired, mine, everybody who was on the show, their first screen test ever. So even Kayla, who had already been working there, they used her interviewing Pete Dunne when she had different hair and bangs to here. And everybody's first screen test for the company was used as the promos for Bump, and they kept it mysterious. So, they showed me, looking off to a script and coming back, and it's all my and that's how they promo, and they wanted it to be ambiguous. So I do that, and it went fine. It was actually one that Ryan Popola did. I remember watching that WWE Now. It was about, I said something like, Kevin Owens is going off. I mean, really going off. And then I get taken to another part of the digital area. Once again, I got a tour. I saw what became the Bump Studio that day, and it was being built to be the Up, Up, Down, Down Studio, which Austin Creed, Xavier Woods, my buddy right here, and I would then feud about months later. Little did I know, but they were still building this new digital office out. And I get taken basically to the opposite side of the building. I got set on a couch and they go, hey, we want to do this segment about this talk show. And we'll just talk about what's going on in WWE. And at the time, this is why I saw the things lately. This is what was going on. Truth, Drake, 24/7 title, the wedding, the chasing, Drake in his underwear, all that stuff. So that's what we talk about. And I talk about Drake being in his underwear, and they get that outtake, and that ends up in something later on. And I basically did like a talking Bump segment with someone who ended up being one of the producers and editors on the show. He just sat next to me and we shot the shit about it. And that was it. And they were like, that was great. I heard a lot of good things, but you never know. And then I had to sit and wait for a month. And you will have to sit and wait for the rest of that story. Hey, this is Matt Camp. Thanks for checking out one of our recent clips from the Wrestling Mat. Why is someone so close to The Rock kind of throwing Cody under the bus?
Yeah, a lot of people won't engage with Jim Cornette. I did, just because I have a mark for Jim Cornette. And
Please subscribe right now. Hit the like and turn on notifications so you don't miss a thing. And I think you should listen to your TV partners. Let me tell you about WWE and a little insight. More subscribers means more content. And make sure you follow us on social media at WrestlingMat23 on both Twitter and Instagram.